Greetings all to joining us for our Imagine Circularity live stream today. And in comparison to a number of live streams that we have, this has nothing to do with us, or very much in the background, our involvement. It has everything to do with you. That's right, it's about you. And it's about you back there, and so go back here, and then those people back there. And it's all about all of you, because we are very keen to find out exactly what your take is on the subject of circularity. My name is Mike Boyle, and I have a wonderful cast that I would love to go ahead and introduce. So let's move on to our description of our panelists today. We start off with Sören Bauer, who is the president of Revolve Circular. Then we continue on to Walter Vermeulen, who is the associate professor of governance and sustainable production and consumption at the University of Utrecht. Then we move on to Patrizia Heidegger, who is the director of Global Policies and Sustainability at the European Environmental Bureau. And last but certainly not least, we close with Kyle Richie, who is an author and actually has a number of titles. And so I picked out what I thought was the most pertinent. I hope that's okay with you, Kyle. Tied to a book that just came out titled Circular Economy for Dummies. And so I would like to go ahead and bring to the stage. Let me go ahead and make sure I got this one right. And then I cut you off, Sören, so I apologize for that. Let me go ahead and put you on unmute. Sören, thank you very much for joining. I believe that you will be talking about the survey that I alluded to, and perhaps if you can talk about how this is supposed to work and how you would like to get people to be involved and the like.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for having us. We look forward to spending these next 45 minutes with all of you. I actually need to move to presentation mode already. Welcome everyone to those following us live, and also to all those who will watch this YouTube video at a later stage. That's fine. I will briefly present where we are coming from and what we're launching today. What we're launching today is called, or we branded it as Imagine Circularity, and it's all about how people around the globe perceive a circular economy. And that's an initiative by ourselves at Revolve Circular, and great support and great collaboration with the Copernicus Institute of Sustainability Development at the Utrecht University in the Netherlands. So what we did is these last 3 months is to develop a survey, a very quick and hopefully fun and kind of educational survey on how people around the world imagine a circular economy. That is because there's so many various definitions, so many visions of what a circular economy actually is. There's no agreed upon definition. And we thought that this will be a very interesting exercise for people to take, to tell us what they think and how they perceive a circular economy. Here's our timeline. Just to say that we're launching it today, as you can see. Our launch is an official side event of the World Circular Economy Forum. We are very grateful to the Finnish Innovation Fund Sitra, who accepted our launch today as a side event. We want many more partners to join, and our early birds deadline for this is on the 14th of May, in a bit less than 1 month from now. You can also join up until the end of November. I think the image is a bit blurry here. I apologize for that. And we're running the survey up until 15th of January next year. So that's around about 8 or 9 months. And we hope that with your collaboration, different organizations around the world, we will be able to turn what's currently an English-only survey into many different languages. And by the time we reach March next year, we want to have several reports. Here are a few countries that are already involved. I put a question mark behind a few. I'm a German immigrant in Austria, and I obviously want both countries to have their respective German version of the survey. We're also talking to colleagues in Finland, and you see a few countries here which show that in several countries, several organizations, which you see here, have already started engaging with us and expressed their interest to join the survey initiative and bring it to their country. I'm very pleased to this morning to have received a request by the University of Wellington, all the way from New Zealand. But as you can see, we have two great Pan-African organizations involved. We have the European Environmental Bureau, which is with us today, Vito in Belgium, two relatively small companies in Chile and Colombia, Treasure and BA+. We have an Indian partner, Cleantech 360 in Malta, Circular Together in Poland. So these are just some partners. And all what we did these last 3 months would not have been possible with the support of Revolve, which is our mother brand. Thank you, Stuart, and thank you to everyone at Revolve for your support in making this possible, but also the Utrecht University, the colleagues from Circular Economy for Dummies. We had great support developing the intellectual property regulations of this by a VHM law. And thank you, Mike, for hosting us. And I'll be done. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to take that one as being a call to action for me. So perhaps, sorry, if I can, yep, we're doing good. Maybe if I can come up with a follow-up question for you, Sören, could you maybe describe to us when you're done with the survey and the like, what would be the results that you'd be looking for?
Well, you will see Walter will briefly introduce the 3 survey questions to everyone. The thing when you launch or when you develop or design a global survey is, I mean, who likes to take surveys? So we really try to make it kind of educative, interesting, and fast. So that's 3 questions only. But we do ask questions about different value retention options, which is circular economy jargon, which we simplified so that everyone understands it. We also ask a question about different visions regarding circular economy. So I believe we will have very interesting results in terms of the different perceptions of different age groups, different people in different countries or continents. Maybe women even perceive circular economy differently from men. We have a category, obviously, where people self-identify themselves by their job category or which industry they work in. So there will be a variety of results. And I should say that we're trying to reach 1 million people, which is very ambitious, and we will just see how far we get.
That sounds wonderful. And maybe perhaps I might have missed it, so please correct me if there's something you've already mentioned. As far as the timelines are concerned, you mentioned English only now. You're looking to move to multiple languages. Can we come up with an estimate when you think this entire process will be over?
Yeah, good question, Mike. So in order to avoid time pressure or putting too much pressure on ourselves, and how do we reach 1 million people? And even if we have 250,000, it will be fine. I mean, we're doing this for the first time. So we will see. The timeline is that we want different partners, or we can only do this with different partners who take the survey, embrace it, and translate it in the respective language. This week, for example, I will talk to the Italian platform for circular economy, who want to organizations coming together to co-create the Italian version of the survey, i.e. the 3 questions we asked, and add up to another 5 questions for Italy, specifically, so that they can engage Italians on circular economy in Italy. So the timeline is, I believe, within the next 3 months, we should see German, French, Spanish, Italian, maybe Polish, and maybe some other language versions of the survey, and then engage people around the world to take their respective language version. But we start with English because this is what we could do until date.
Sounds wonderful. Then I look forward to the Esperanto version of your survey. Thank you very much. And I'm going to say, I'm going to wish you a bon voyage, Sören, and I will go ahead and bring Walter to the stage. Let me go ahead and mute you. I feel compelled to go ahead and be the master of... Hold on, I cannot unmute you. I'm afraid, Walter, you will have to unmute yourself. Thank you. And you did that. Excellent. Thank you very much. So perhaps if you can, Walter, first of all, thank you very much for joining. Perhaps if you can kind of piggyback on some of the things that Sören was talking about and allude to some of the components to be found within the survey.
Yeah, interesting. Sören already talked a bit about it, but it's quite a unique form of open science where we are sort of presenting the backbone of a very big survey, indeed aiming for 1 million respondents all over the world. But it is very much a form of collaboration. So we are looking indeed for partners to further this around the globe. But why do we do this? Circular economy is, of course, not a completely new concept. It has been gaining momentum in the last roughly 10 years, but it actually existed already longer. And in many cases, different words have been used for it. So this survey is not a sort of a contest of which scientist or which explanation is the most popular. What we want to harvest is how in different places, in societies, in different places in the world, in different countries, how people are seeing this issue, this topic of creating a society with closed loops instead of a linear society where we still think that we can put things on landfills and walk away with that. So we very much want to understand the different views of people. And if you look at that, it's around the world, we see very big differences in the speeds of taking up these kind of new developments. But it's also the type of vision that people have on circular economy also depends on where in society they are active. Are they from industry? Are they from academia? Within academia, what kind of discipline are people coming from? If they're from government, at what level are they? If they are in education, so there are a lot of differences there. And what we want to understand is how people in different places actually see the issue of getting a more circular economy around. So for that, we have in the survey a couple of questions, simple questions just about who you are and where you are, etc. But the key questions are built around what needs to be done by whom. That's what Sören already referred to. A more difficult word is action imperatives. Who needs to do what? And you can distinguish that for producers, for consumers, etc. So there are a couple of questions, 3 main questions. One is about these action imperatives. We ask people to say how important they find the various proposed ideas about circular economy. Then what kind of aspects should be included in looking at that? You are raising your hand for me? Or for
I'm trying to bring the visual into that of what you're saying, Walter.
Okay, good. And we identified, looking at the longer debates, a couple of different ways of looking at it. So we will ask people which they actually see more as their own view. And maybe people would actually have additional views, so that's possible there as well. So what we do is for 3 main questions, a couple of just general questions about who the people are, from which country, etc. And that should be possible for everybody to fill in less than 15 minutes. But like what I started about, it is a collaborative effort. We never get 1 million respondents in 200 countries around the world without the support of other institutions, which might be universities, but it could also be any kind of circular economy platform, government agencies, etc. So what we ask people is to support in the distribution of the survey in their respective countries. And the system has been built in such a way that we can easily translate the questionnaire also in any other language, Chinese. There's a longer list of people already knocking on the doors to participate. For example, today I was talking with my friends in Vietnam, and they also want to do it so they can translate it in the Vietnamese version. But by making this a more collaborative open science activity, we also offer the opportunity that people add a couple of additional questions, very specific for their situation. So I could imagine that the people in Vietnam want to have a couple of questions about, okay, where are we in Vietnam with this? So for this, there's an option of 5 additional questions, which will be reviewed by us to assure that the framing of the questions is in a proper way, that it will work indeed in the system. And this is the open invitation to any organization around the world. Connect to us via the website, and all the information about it is available there.
Now I'm going to go ahead and pose the same question to you that I posed to Sören. So at the end of this, whatever it may take as far as the duration is concerned, what would be your value proposition, or the things that you would expect at the end to make sure that this journey was worthwhile?
Well, that would indeed be, it's partly seeing what we did in the short history is map out all these different perceptions. There's a nice website there, the long timeline of anyone that contributed to it. But what we want to see is to what extent this now really has been going around in the different countries, and within countries in the different sectors in the countries, and where the support is and where the challenges are. Also this additional feature of adding your own context-specific questions in other places, in other sectors, in your specific sector, enables us to get a far richer picture than just having a from one side sending out a survey.
Full agreement, and it allows you to come up with a broad spectrum of the various interpretations of that, of what you're looking for collectively within the confines of the survey. Wonderful. Alrighty, well then, Barte, thank you very much. I am going to ask you to go ahead, and I'll send you back to the VIP room, and we'll be bringing you back out when it's time for the panel discussion. So thank you very much for that. And Patrizia, now it's your turn to shine. Patrizia, thank you very much for joining. The interesting part of your involvement, of course, is looking at it not necessarily directly from the survey perspective, but you have much broader, more specific goals in mind. So perhaps if you can kind of talk about how the EEB actually plays into that of what we're trying to do with the survey here.
Yes, sure. Thank you, first of all, for the invitation today to the launch of Imagine Circularity. It's a very exciting exercise. So at the EEB, we're the largest network of environmental citizens organizations in Europe, and we've been advocating for the right conditions and the right legal framework to make a circular economy the new norm, mainly working with decision makers in the European Union and in the member states, but also exchanging and collaborating with circular economy advocates globally. So well, why do we focus on decision makers and circular economy policies, and how do we educate them or seek to influence them? Well, as we probably all know, the circular economy is not going to work if we won't manage to take everyone along with us. So what does that mean? The circular economy needs to become the new norm. It also needs to become economical for all of us, more economical than the linear take, make, use, lose. So in order for the circular economy to become that new norm, we need legislation that makes it the norm. And we need legislation to create incentives. There's this famous example that is being quoted a lot, but which I think is very kind of illustrates this very well. When people ask me, well, what does legislation have to do with circular economy? There's there's this example of this law proposal from Sweden from a couple of years ago when they reduced tax on repair work from 25 to 12.5% just to make repair more attractive. Or why not make repair work tax-free altogether? So these are the kind of incentives that we need. And we, of course, also need legislation that phases out the most wasteful products. So this is why we work with decision makers to make sure that we don't leave that important transition just to the market, hoping that leadership from business on the one hand and more conscious consumers on the other hand will do that job alone and drive that change. If we believe that, then circular economy is going to remain a niche or even a luxury, and we will never manage to scale it up. So we engage with policymakers at all levels, from the local level, with our member organizations, member NGOs, all the way up to the level of the EU and even global environmental processes. So at the moment, our team working on circular economy, they work on eco-design, on the batteries directive, on the waste framework. So there's a lot of there's a lot of momentum at the moment to really drive policy change. But of course, that change is also happening at the local level. So we also engage with local authorities and with the city level. For instance, we're involved in some research projects to really understand the local context and to work with decision makers there. Now, looking at citizens and kind of engaging with the wider public and how can we educate or raise people's awareness about the circular economy, that's another important part of our work. So as I've just said, in the first place, we really need the right regulatory framework to build on. But then, of course, we need to empower consumers. The way we've been working in this is really to make sure that as citizens, we claim our right to be able to make informed decisions about what we consume, whether that's energy or products or food. And we really want us to focus on citizens as rights holders rather than just speaking about consumers. So we try to mobilize people around the economic transition and circular economy. Two examples are, at the moment, we've been working together with other organizations on a documentary called The 25% Revolution on the transition to a sustainable human economy. But we also are engaged in different campaigns, for instance, Right to Repair, where we try to mobilize people around the demand that products must last longer, must be repairable. And this campaign really frames it as a right to repair. So this is also a way to kind of change the narrative about circular economy. It's not just about businesses who make a decision to design a product in another way, but it's also about our right as citizens to make these informed choices, and also that we have a right to good and long-lasting products. So if you allow me, sorry.
No, go ahead, please.
I have one final thought about also the different contexts around the globe, because we just heard from Walter that and Sören that this survey has a potential to really also give us a better understanding how different groups think about circular economy. So, of course, we're very much aware of the fact that each region and each country has different challenges when it comes to the transition to circularity. We believe that there are certain principles that are equally applicable to all of us, whether we are somewhere in Europe or in Africa, in India, or Latin America, wherever it is, such as sufficiency, the design of durable products, repairability, a focus on local production and consumption, non-toxicity, etc. We also believe that there's a lot of potential in exchanging and learning from our different challenges, and kind of together addressing finding solutions for the different challenges that we have. I mean, our challenges in the global north to get to circularity are quite fundamentally different from those in the global south. So this is why we will follow this survey with a lot of curiosity to learn more about these different approaches and fears and perspectives and opportunities around circular economy. And I found it quite exciting to hear from Sören, for instance, that the survey could help us, for instance, to understand better the gender impact or different perceptions between men and women. We already know from science, for instance, that men and women tend to have different values and different perceptions around environmental issues in general. So I'm curious to see how that translates into circular economy aspects. And it might also be interesting to see how the survey could help us to for instance, find out more about the concerns of, for instance, indigenous peoples and local communities, or of zero waste movement people, or people working in the informal sector. So of course that means we'll have to make sure that the survey reaches out to and is well distributed to a very diverse group of people. But this is a very interesting potential to really use that information to shape better policies. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for that, Patrizia. Yeah, I have a good 60 years plus experience in understanding the difference between genders, especially with regards to how information is taking up. I think it's maybe to kind of close the loop on some of the things that we're concentrating on today, specifically tied to the survey. And there was a word that you hadn't mentioned, but I think you indirectly mentioned it. It's called empowerment, and it was all tied to the ability, and I think this is one of the real power elements of this survey, is that people have the feeling that they can go ahead and voice their opinion, and that their opinions are going to be heard. So how does that relate to that of what you're doing, and how do you go ahead and take that information and run with it?
Yeah, you're right. I probably haven't used that word, but I think what we do is really about empowering citizens around circular economy concepts. So it's true that I think there's still a lot of work that can be done in terms of empowering people to share their ideas about circular economy, and maybe also to make sure that it's not just perceived as a very technical issue, or something that big companies do, or something that maybe some technical experts deal with, but that it's really something that everybody can get engaged in. And also, as I've said before, I mean, I think for us the link is really important to also show to people that their ideas have a value, but also that empowerment also means that this is also about kind of rights and obligations, and that people kind of should claim that right to better understanding what they consume and buy, or also to kind of claim certain quality standards when they make a decision. So I think the survey can also contribute to show to people that everybody can be part of that movement of creating a circular economy.
Right. I see there are three takeaways from that of what you just said: the ability, the empowerment as such, the freedom to go ahead and voice one's opinion. And I'm going to go ahead and piggyback on something you said at the end: the responsibility that each one of us has within society to make sure that we make this happen as a collective. So that these are all very positive words. Patrizia, thank you very much. If I can go ahead and pass you back to the VIP room, I promise to bring you back. And I would like to go ahead and move on to our last participant, and you were so kind as to actually take yourself off mute, Kyle. Thank you very much for that. No, and Kyle, sure, you are the individual kind of that rounds the circle, because you are talking about something that is actually very specific but general at the same time, and that is the idea of circular economy for dummies. So perhaps if you can kind of describe to us what this concept's all about.
Sure. So let me share my screen here.
And I will go ahead and empower you. How about that? I will remove.
Can you see that okay?
We're doing fine.
All right. So I had the interesting task as a United States citizen to try and find a way to introduce the idea of circular economy to the United States, where sustainability as a term and phrase is really seen as the optimal. I'm a consultant in the architecture, engineering, and construction industry, and sustainable is essentially as good as it gets. But as a trained environmental scientist through my university days, I know that's not the case. So the circular economy for me was really the pathway to show what's better than sustainable, which is circular economy, because it involves that regeneration of natural land systems. So, if someone were to ask you, how is your marriage? And you just respond, well, it's sustainable. I mean, it's not that great of a thing, but circular economy it allows us to essentially make up for all the damage that we've been causing over the past decade plus. So the circular economy for dummies is a way for me to promote this idea that we can go beyond sustainable, we can close our loops, and we can essentially design out waste in every single life cycle that we're dealing with as humans. So I deal with circular economy now as the author of this book, but also as like I said, a consultant in the architecture and engineering industry. So I'm getting to apply this now on a real world level and start to break those individual life cycles out for our owners, to show them really what impact we can make depending on what layer we're trying to address within a building. So the survey is really kind of an extension of my desire to get the individual to rethink what is possible. So whether that's in their personal life or professional life, the circular economy is something that the individual needs to understand. So this book is really my equivalent of the survey of trying to get that individual to become more involved in the circular economy.
Okay, that was my cue to come back. Thank you very much, Kyle. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting the way that you portrayed it, just to make sure that you feel a little bit better. Perhaps you might have recognized it the way that I speak, that you are not alone in looking at it from a certain perspective, certainly from a hereditary perspective. But that being said, I think you would agree with me that it's much more than just awareness. In other words, that we are aware that we have an issue, that we are aware that something needs to be done. And certainly looking from a personal perspective, I would think that this survey should allow us to actually have a better awareness of what people are expecting. But awareness alone is not enough. So how do we actually go ahead and take this awareness part and transform it into something a little bit more tangible? What's your take on that one?
So I'm a very much believer that we're not going to get every single individual to quote unquote do the right thing without proper incentives. So within the framework of my professional career, I don't go into a project and assume that the client is going to have mapped out already what we want to achieve in terms of sustainability. One of my jobs is to show them the incentives tied to those actions. So I don't specify products that have no VOCs and low formaldehyde. I don't just do that. I communicate the benefits to the individuals of that building to help kind of instill that incentive in the decision-making process. So if we start looking at decision-making based on incentives, which what we were talking about earlier about policy, that's sort of the platform that I'm going with to essentially motivate the individual to start making the right decisions.
Wow, that means you're going back to what James Carville was talking about in 1992, where he put that big poster on the Clinton campaign walls where he says, "It's the economy, stupid." And so for me, that would be my take of that, of what you're talking about. Wonderful. Then Kyle, of course, I can only agree with you, because if people don't have incentives, my personal take is that it will not live. It will die, because you've gone ahead and made them aware and you told them how to do it, but you did not give them a reason to continue. And so I think this is all very important stuff. And I'd love to go ahead and bring back the rest of our participants from our live stream, so I have everybody back. And perhaps if we can make a general call to action to anyone who's actually going ahead and watching this live stream. If you have any questions, please feel free to go ahead and add any comments. But I think that I'd like to go ahead and start with one question, and I know it's very, very, very ostentatious. But there are certain goals that we have. It goes back to Paris 2015, and we hear that it's been, I mean, Sören and I live here in Vienna, and we have the city of Vienna that claims that they are going to reach carbon neutral by 2040 without a blueprint. Now, I don't know how they do that. I think it's quite interesting, but we have some very serious goals that we need to reach. And of course, we are very blessed coming from the global north, all of us here. But how do we go ahead and make that happen? It's enough to go ahead and say that that's our goal, but it has to happen somehow. So would anybody like to go ahead and jump in and say what you think the path is? And I'm looking at 2050 because that's the Paris goal. Anybody care to go ahead and take that one up? Okay, Warte, you have volunteered. Then I give you the stage.
Yeah, maybe that's interesting because the Dutch government had the guts to say that actually in 2030, half of the virgin material inputs into the economy should have been phased out. And by 2050, everything, well, the last thing might be physically impossible, probably. There will always be a little bit of virgin material input still needed. So that's quite challenging. And interestingly enough, the policy mainly relies on supporting front-runner industries to support policy with projects, with pilot projects with businesses supported by academics. But probably this is far not enough to really achieve those goals. So what is really needed to combine all the knowledge available to see in specific cases, like for example, electronic waste. We have systems of extended producer responsibility already existing for quite some time in any of the European countries. They are now, after 15, 20 years, able to collect roughly half of what has been put on the market. But the other half is still to be collected and found. And we know by experience that a part of that other half disappears into countries like Nigeria and Middle Africa. And probably anyone can imagine the images of what happens there with it. So there are quite some strong challenges to be dealt with. And creating a system where you actually start reasoning from the point where you want to be in 2030 or in 2050, identify anything that is needed to get there, and then translate this back into the regulatory systems and also in the price systems in this. So we just published a report on this, showing these pathways, where it actually would mean that electronic producers of electronic equipment would have to pay far more than they are now paying in the extended producer responsibility systems in Europe. So this financial incentive, but also the combination of clearly showing the evidence of what kind of technologies are needed to be implemented are quite essential.
Warte, you were singing Kyle's song. But I'd be very curious because Sören, you and I know each other a little bit, and I know that you are not swayed by smoke and mirrors. So going back to what Warte was talking about in this idea of the goals and the ability to go ahead and reach it, I'd be keen on your opinion as to what degree you see this as being viable, and maybe kind of piggybacking on that, what do we need to actually put in place to make it happen?
Thanks, Mike. Well, the first thing I want to say about goals is when I think about goals, I think about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, because this is the first time that over 190 governments in the world came together back in 2015, a bit more than 5 years ago, to agree on what they hope the world should look like in 2030, which is in 10 years from now. So for me, the question related to goals is all about accountability of governments and efforts to actually stick to the commitments. And in my own research, I came across the huge potential of circular policies and circular practices for achieving many various of the Sustainable Development Goals. The reason why I always feel like we need to maintain pressure on policymakers, but also on businesses, to look at the SDGs and to create that relationship between circularity and the SDGs and make that happen. I find that personally also more interesting, because 10 years is far more concrete than 30 years. I believe it's relatively easy to come up with a vision for 2040 or 2050, by which time many of those people who might develop these visions have retired or have passed away, while in 10 years from now, you're much more accountable to actually kind of implement what you said you would do by 2030.
That looks like a wonderful segue into concentrating perhaps, Patrizia, and some of the things that you are directly involved with. Let me see if I can go ahead and do this. Let me move here. Nope, I'm not doing it right. Let me try it a different way. Nope, that's not working either. Then let me go ahead and try it this way. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to freestyle it here. Patrizia, perhaps if you can allude to maybe some of the things that Sören talked about tied to policy and what's achievable and the timelines, because that's something you're directly involved with. That would be very interesting to hear from your perspective.
Sure. Maybe let me first say that, I mean, because you started off by kind of referring to these kind of big objectives that we have set ourselves, or different governments have set, or that even the international community has given itself. So I think it's an important first step. I mean, we need to have these goals defined. We have to have these visions. So I think it's great to see that more governments are pledging to carbon neutrality, or coming up with great objectives for virgin material use, or whatever it is. I think that's a great development that we have all these pledges and commitments. But of course, now the question is, how do we make sure that this can be delivered by 2030 or 40 or 50, or whatever the timeline is that we're putting for these different goals. And I think the Sustainable Development Goals that Sören has referred to, I mean, they're a good example on the one hand of having very ambitious targets set, but then you also, of course, need to make sure that this time that you're giving yourself is very well used. It already shows that governments who have kind of put in place more detailed implementation plans with clear timelines, and what can be achieved in 3 years, and 5 years, and 10 years. Also, who are kind of setting up targets that can be measured on a long run, and also year by year, are more successful than those who just commit to big objectives but without having kind of a more detailed plan in place. But I think obviously, in order to achieve these objectives, we need to look at solutions at all different levels. I mean, we're involved, just to give you a few examples, we're involved in certain developments that really happen at the global level. So just one example is that next year there's an opportunity at the international level to get an agreement from the international community that, as the globe, we need to come to terms with the plastic pollution problem, the problem of increasing plastics pollution, and to put in place a global treaty to curb plastic production. I mean, really at the source, and to kind of put a full life cycle approach to the plastics problem through an international legally binding plastics treaty. So that would be one example of how we have to tackle certain things really from the top to the bottom, because the problems are so global. Then at the same time, of course, looking at it from a more European perspective, I mean, we have all these pledges now and objectives around the European Green Deal, the 2030 objectives, 2040, 2050 objectives. And here, of course, we also see that we need to, while we need certain policies that are very broad, and then that kind of cover all the different sectors of the economy, we also need to continue working on really sector specific solutions. So as EB, we work on fair and circular ICT. We work in the building sector. We work on textiles, and other sectors. So of course, we also need to kind of continue that more detailed work for each and every sector to reach these objectives. And my last point would be that, and that again ties in with the survey and the discussion that we've already had about a more general public and citizens out there. I think there's still a lot of work to be done around the general narrative around the kind of economic system that we need and the kind of economic system that we need in order to make the circular economy happen. Circular economy is sometimes perceived as a bit of a technical topic about materials and how you kind of material cycles, etc. But of course, a circular economy is not going to work under the current parameters of this economic system. So, for instance, we also need to link the discussion about circular economy about the future of work. How do we want to work in the future? How do we want to create quality jobs? The question of the just transition. How do we make sure that this transition also kind of delivers more equity in society? So, I think there's still a lot of work to be done to link the circular economy discussion to other important, elements of that discussion around the economic transition, and that's also a very important part of our work these days.
Wonderful. Then, Patrizia, I could only agree with you. I am very appreciative that you were able to address not just the ecological components, but the social components. That's something that very often is being neglected. And I'm afraid, Kyle, you are our stopper. And I had to go ahead and look up in line because it's been such a long time since I lived in the States. But there is a stopper coming from the Chicago Cubs by the name of Craig Kimbrell, and I don't know if you know this person's name, but if I got it right, you are living in Chicago. So
I am.
You are our stopper. And so I'm going to ask for you to go ahead and close the loop on all these things that we talked about to make sure that we actually go ahead and pull out a W at the end of this game.
I like that. I think the overarching theme here is that we all have a role to play. And within that role, there are other roles who are directly connected with us. So stakeholders all have something to say. They all play a part. So it's very necessary for whatever area of the circular economy we all are choosing to interact within, that we keep that in mind, that each person has a role to play, and it's not operating within a vacuum. So often we make decisions with these blinders on based on our life, but forget that our lives then impact other people's lives. So that's still a area that I'm trying to figure out, is what is my sphere of influence versus my sphere of impact. And I'm trying to grow that sphere of impact because I see such value in the circular economy. And as I'm telling people about this in the United States, getting a little more incorporation into my work, I'm seeing that positive response, which gives me even more motivation. So in addition to all of us having a role, I really do think circular economy is going to be the framework for the future. So I think that pretty much ties together everything we've been discussing today.
Not only do I agree, maybe if I could try to synthesize some of the comments that I heard, certainly tied to empowerment, the idea that it's not just ecological, but we need to go ahead and deal with the social. Kyle, some of the points that you raised were clearly tied to inclusiveness. And I think if I can completely close the loop, and the idea of actually going ahead and having the survey have your say for each individual, so that we can actually come up with the cumulative information of all parts of this wonderful planet that we live on. Wonderful planet. I mean this on purpose. That we're able to go ahead and take that data. We're able to take that data and actually go ahead and put something together in a fashion that hasn't been possible otherwise. And maybe, and I see, Walter, you're nodding your head in agreement. So please, if you can kind of allude, and I'm going to go ahead and close with Walter, and then perhaps Sören give you the last words. And then I'm afraid we're going to go ahead and have to close our session. please, Walter. I'd like to.
Yes, well, all the different aspects that were now just discussed, they are part of the survey in the sense of which aspects, and that includes both the ecological and the social equity elements. They are in the questionnaire, and we want to see indeed to what extent people in different parts of the world adhere to these various aspects. And I really have the feeling that once we see these results and we can compare also between countries, between sectors, and the overarching data from the rest of the world, that this will indeed give perspective to people participating in it, and open an agenda for further discussion after seeing the results of the survey.
I'm in full agreement, because this has nothing to do with us, but it has everything to do with you, all of you out there who are actually going ahead and viewing this, perhaps live or perhaps later on. And with that, I go ahead and leave the last word to you, Sören, if perhaps you can go ahead and describe from your perspective.
Yeah, well, I will not describe it from my perspective. This has been a great, a bit more than 45 minutes. Thank you so much for your moderation, Mike. I want to close by just mentioning 3 people who have been very helpful and decisive. And actually, first of all, by saying the famous survey is online since 2:45. So we have activated it since an hour ago. And you can actually take it now. And the 3 people I would like to thank particularly are Martin Callisto-Friand, who is working with Walter at the Copernicus Institute. He's doing his PhD there, and he was very, we worked together many hours to actually finalize the survey. Thank you, Martin. I also want to thank Philippa, who is our head of design at Revolve. Because Imagine Circularity would not be Imagine Circularity without her. She's the one who came up with the brand, and I think it works well. Thank you, Philippa. And I want to thank Sana Bakali in Malta. She's 19 years old, and she double-checked and triple-checked the survey because she said in the beginning, the one of the versions we had was intimidating. Because it was full of jargon, and we tried to simplify it to an extent that it's methodologically still correct, and still anyone can take it, because this survey is not about your level of knowledge, it's about your perception. So it should really be for anyone to take.